So I'm super excited to be here to speak to you today, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my inspiration for some of the books that I've written, and we'll get especially to A Box of Bones, which is the new book, which is kind of sat right near you. So I do want to talk to you a little bit about that. But before I begin, most people do ask me, what is your inspiration for writing your books? And I want to talk to you today a little bit about, whoops, there we go. I want to talk to you a little bit about fairy tales, and I'll tell you why in a sec. So, an extremely smart man said, brilliant, genius said, if you want your children to be intelligent, read them fairy tales. He also went on to say, if you want your children to be more intelligent, read them more fairy tales. Does anybody know who this genius was? Genius?
Bill Gates?
No?
Your husband?
Oh, that would be, no, yeah. He's pretty smart, but I wouldn't say genius.
Bill Nye, the science guy?
You're actually on the right track in science.
Oh, arrested. Einstein.
Absolutely. It was actually Albert Einstein. Right. So, I want to talk to you. I know we've lost a lot of time, so if I have to stop each time, it's going to take even longer. I want to talk to you a little bit about some old fairy tales. My mother she immigrated to Canada from Germany, and one of the only things she brought with her was this old book of German fairy tales. And I was raised hearing all these old stories. And the thing about the old stories, the old fairy tales, is that they were actually quite dark. And the endings weren't always happy, they weren't always wonderful, and they weren't always fair. And this is one of the stories that I absolutely loved, and I won't tell you the whole story, but it is about a girl, and she falls in a well, and she goes down, and she ends up not landing at the bottom of a well, but she lands in a magical land. And she helps a lot of people there, and a lot of inanimate objects. And when she comes out, she's sort of richly rewarded. Now, she has, the evil stepsister, which, stepmothers and stepsisters get kind of a bad rap in a lot of these fairy tales. I happen to be a stepmom, and I don't think that I'm a terrible stepmom. But at the same time, she falls down the well, and she's actually quite lazy and quite not nice. And in the end, she's severely punished. So again, this story sort of taught me a lot in life. It said, work hard, and hopefully you'll be richly rewarded, and don't be too lazy. And then this is another one of the stories that I absolutely adored, The Elves and the Shoemaker. And of course, if you know anything about the story, the shoemaker puts out some wonderful leather, and he goes to sleep at night, and along come these magical, mysterious, unseen elves, and they create the most beautiful pair of shoes. So way back when I was about your age, I thought maybe, just maybe, if I take my homework and I put that out on the table at night, maybe some magical elves will come and do that. That didn't work. Don't try it. You'll just end up with no homework. And if you go the next day to school and say, I'm sorry, the elves didn't do it, it's not going to cut it with your teachers, right? Another story that I really loved is a story called Rumpelstiltskin. And Rumpelstiltskin stayed with me for a lot of reasons. So if you know the story, I'm just going to give you a brief background, but here's this wonderful maiden, and she's given a task, and the task is to spin straw into gold, and she can't do it. And along comes this another kind of an elf-like creature. He's a little kind of suspect in his motivations, but he comes by and he says, oh, I'll spin that straw into gold for you, but you'll have to give me something. And she says, sure. And he says, you'll have to give me your firstborn child. And she says, sure. And, at this point, you might want to reconsider whether you need that straw spun into gold. But she takes him up on his offer. But in the end, she kind of has to trick him out of it because she doesn't want to give him her firstborn. So in the end, Rumpelstiltskin is tricked. And in my opinion, I wasn't really rooting for the maiden. I wasn't, because I was thinking to myself, wait a minute, he did everything that was asked of him, and they made a bargain. And in the end, she reneged on that bargain. And I think to myself, well, that really wasn't truly fair. So that sort of stuck with me as well. And another, I had another fairy tale book, and this time it was a fairy tale book, not just of old German fairy tales, but of fairy tales all around the world. There were Italian fairy tales, Russian fairy tales, tales from the Middle East, and tales from England. And this one is a tale from England, and it's called The Little Match Girl. And I'm not going to tell you too much about this one because I can't talk about it without a big giant box of tissue, because it's terribly, terribly, terribly sad. It's happy, but it's sad, very sad. And so again, getting to the end of these fairy tales, I know that we talk a lot as teachers about resiliency, and we talk about how do we make children more resilient. Well, in my opinion, when we don't read to them stories that have endings that are sometimes unfair and sometimes sad and sometimes, scary, then we're not really, if everything is just happy, happy, happy ending, and quite often there are a lot of editors and people in the publishing industry, they'll say, Marina, you can't write that for a middle grade audience. It doesn't have a happy, happy, happy ending. And I say, but you know what? Not everything has to. I mean, it can't be devastatingly disastrous. I wouldn't write a book where you just put it down and we're so completely destroyed by it. That's not right. But in the end, there have to be characters maybe, and when I wrote my book, The Doll's Eye, it really is a little bit based on Rumpelstiltskin and a little bit on getting what you want, but then sort of reneging on the bargain that you've made. And so echoes of all of these stories find themselves with me. I'm going to talk to you very briefly on transformation, because at the heart of all fairy tales is transformation. So we have often we have people who transform into animals and animals that transform into people. We have rich that transforms into poor and poor into rich. And we have even ugly that transforms into beauty and beauty into ugly. We even have, again, a puppet that can transform into a real life boy. So again, it's only fitting that all of these fairy tales over hundreds of years have actually transformed themselves, because transformation, that's what fairy tales are about. Now, here are some pictures from my old book of German fairy tales, plus one that doesn't fit. Which one doesn't fit? Right, because here you have all these dark fairy tales, and then you have what Disney does, and you have The Little Mermaid. And I'll have to tell you something, The Little Mermaid, if you don't know the real story, you must read it, because truly, if you were to ask me what is my all-time favorite old fairy tale, it is Little Mermaid. And it really, Disney did this a very big disservice. Okay, because what they did was they took a beautiful story, and the story is about this little mermaid who's in the sea, and she sees this prince, and she falls madly in love with him, but she has no legs, so she actually swims down to the sea witch, pretty much like the beginning of the story. And the sea witch isn't evil. In the real story, she's just a sea witch. She has magical powers, and she's not particularly great looking, but she's not really evil. She just, Little Mermaid says, I want some legs, and she says, I can give you those legs, but they're going to be very painful. Are you sure you want these? Yes. It'll feel like every step you take is like walking on glass. Are you sure you want these? Yes. She said, well, there's another catch here. The prince must fall in love with you, because if he doesn't fall in love with you, you will die and become sea foam. Do you accept this? And she says, yes. You need to think twice when all of those warning signs are out there, whether you agree to something. She agrees to it. She says, well, what are you going to pay me? I don't know. Well, you have a beautiful voice. I'll take your voice. She pays with her voice. But she gives her voice up freely, which doesn't take it. It's not, a nasty thing. And so up she goes, and she meets the prince live and everything. And he says he likes her. He does. He likes her. He thinks she's nice. He thinks she's sweet. But he's not in love with her. And he doesn't fall in love with her. And in the end, he's going to marry someone else. And the Little Mermaid is going to become sea foam on the ocean. And so her sisters swim down to the same sea witch, and they say, please don't do this. Oh my goodness, she's going to become sea foam. Is there a way out of this bargain? Is there a way out of this? And the sea witch says, yes, take this dagger. It's a dagger, big knife, and throw it up on the deck. and give it to the Little Mermaid, and if she plunges that dagger into the heart of the prince, she will live. She'll become a mermaid again. Otherwise, she's sea foam. So they throw up the dagger, and does she do it?
No. Yeah. Yes.
No, she does not. And truly, she does love this prince, and she loves this prince enough to let him go and be happy. And so in the end, the story that I received was that as I grow up, hopefully older than you, and like somebody, they may not like me back. And so I can be mean and I can be nasty and I can be vengeful, or I can say, you know what? I like them. They didn't like me back. You know what? Let them be happy, and let them go. And I learned that message from the Little Mermaid. But when you always learn everything's happy, she gets her voice back, she marries the prince, look, it's sparkly and wonderful, then you don't learn that lesson. And so I learned that lesson in life, that not everybody that I go forward to fall in love with is going to fall in love with me back. And so you're kind of robbed of that lesson. Now, before I disparage Disney too much, Disney got some things right. I know that there's a new one coming out, but I'm going to tell you something. This was another one of my favorite old German fairy tales, Sleeping Beauty, but I had a problem with it. Because I read this story where king and queen have a beautiful, beautiful baby, and they're going to throw this party, and guess what? You're invited, and you're invited, and you're invited, and you're invited, and you're invited. You're not invited.
Which one? Which one?
You're not invited. Everybody here is invited. Not you. How would that make you feel?
I really want to hear, but I just want people to talk to me.
It would actually, the number one answer is not sad. The number one answer people say is, it would make me feel angry and sad. And angry and sad together, plus magical powers, right. So, truthfully, I always felt very sorry for the one fairy that was never invited. And I think Disney did a fabulous job of taking a look at that character and what her story might have been, and elaborating on that. So I think they got that right. Another thing that Disney did very well, and do not moan and groan, is Frozen. And I'll tell you why. I'm going to tell you things you know about Frozen, and I'm going to tell you something that hopefully you do not know about Frozen. So you know the story that here's Anna, she's cooped up in a tower and everything like that, and then she is out for the first time ever, and within like 1 minute she bumps into Hans and she says, I love you, and he says, I love you too, let's get married. Okay. All right? And of course that sets off everything, because is Hans truly Prince Charming? No. Right. But we're also going to talk about Elsa, because what Disney did, which was so fabulous, is they took the idea of the wonderful Prince Charming, who was, going to be this amazing guy, and of course we learn he isn't, but they also took the idea of what a villain really is, because in the story, it really is Elsa. She does kind of freeze the whole town and walk away and say, I don't care, let it go, right? But she does it out of not only love for her sister, but she's out of love for her sister. She's told to not, she's born with these powers, she can't help it, she didn't ask for them, and she hurt her sister with it once. She's told by her parents, hide yourself, hide yourself. If you try and hide your true person, if you try and hide who you really are, you can only get away with it for so long before you're going to explode and do the whole let it go thing too. But here's something you may not know, that there are different kinds of writers. I write novels, there are screenplay writers. Screenplay writers write movies and films and things like this. And Disney, they don't just have one person sitting there writing this. They have a big team of people. That's what makes these movies so wonderful. They have a big team of people all writing for them. And they sit around this table. And so they'd actually written a movie. You can look this up. It's true. They'd written the movie, and they'd actually done a lot of the preliminary sketches, and they had a wicked witch with a black pointy hat and a green face, pretty much like from The Wizard of Oz. And they'd done this entire movie with this wicked evil character because it's based on an old fairy tale of the Snow Queen or something. And so they'd done this wicked evil character, and then they took their story and they handed it over to another kind of writer. And the other kind of writer was songwriter, because some people write songs. That's writing. And poetry. And so the songwriters sat around at a piano and they started fiddling around with the keys, fiddling around with the melody, and suddenly they had the song Let It Go. And they actually gave that song back to the writers, and when the writers who wrote the story got that song, they went, uh-oh, we got this whole thing wrong. We don't have an evil, wicked witch here. That is not what we're supposed to be writing. And they actually tore apart their entire script and they rewrote the entire script, and out came Elsa. So that is how it works. Now I'm going to tell you about... Okay. So I love to read... The other things that influenced me beyond fairy tales were mythology, ghost stories, and a guy named Edgar Allan Poe. He wrote some very creepy tales. I love Nancy Drew mysteries because they were not just mysteries, a lot of them had a little bit of a creepy aspect. Like I like the ones like The Hidden Staircase, The Sign of the Twisted Candles. And I absolutely love Narnia. And Narnia is a book, the Chronicles of Narnia, especially The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, really had a huge impact on me and my writing. And if you read A Box of Bones, it figures prominently within that story, and it figures in other stories that I've written as well. So now I want to talk to, and The Monkey's Paw. If we talked about The Doll's Eye, if we had more time, this is a very sort of terrifying story. It's a play, actually, that I saw a long time ago, and it is about wishes, and it's about this monkey's paw, and it has 3 sort of fingers, and then every time a wish is made, one of the fingers curls over. But of course, none of these wishes, they don't go right. And that isn't something that was originally done even in The Monkey's Paw. It was done in the Tales of the Arabian Nights. So this idea of wishes gone awry happens a lot in literature, and that sort of is what happened in my doll's eye. But for a moment now, I want to talk to you about compost. And I think I'm going to stop here and then take questions. But let me talk to you about compost. Way back, when I was your age, we didn't have compost. We had garbage. We had the trash. And we threw everything in the trash. Every single thing went to the trash. Trash went to the landfill, the dump, right? And the dumps got bigger and the earth got, more polluted. And so along came the great wise people who decided we should be recycling things, we should be composting things. And so we take all our banana peels and our little crumbs that we may not have eaten, and we put it into this compost, and the compost gets picked up and it gets put into another area where they add maybe some worms and some insects and different things to help break it down. And what happens is over time that breaks down into the richest, most fertile kind of soil. And what do we do with that soil? We plant new things in it. So what I'm here to tell you is the reason I talked to you about fairy tales and The Monkey's Paw and Nancy Drew and Narnia is because in your mind, you have a giant compost. But please don't go home and say, I met this author today and she said I have garbage in my head. Because that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying in your mind you have a giant compost. And in your mind, everything you see, everything you hear, everything you smell, everything you read goes into this giant compost in your mind, and over time it slowly breaks down, and it actually becomes the richest, most fertile soil of your imagination. And from that imagination grows new things. And that's where I get my ideas. So if you look at my books, if you read my books, they come from certain things. I do want to talk to you a little bit about A Box of Bones because it was set here, and people say, well, you're not really from Vermont, you're not from Burlington, why did you decide to set the book here? And I'll tell you why. Because I wrote the beginning of a story, and I wrote about 10,000 words, and I had this great idea about a box with these bones, and I stopped, and everyone said, oh, you stopped writing? Do you have like writer's block? Don't know how to continue? And I said, no, I know exactly how to continue. They said, well, why don't you finish writing it? And I said, because I think it will be good. I think it will be good, but I don't think it'll be great. I don't think it'll be a great story. And it took me about a year of not writing to realize that I had to take those entire 10,000 words and throw them in the garbage, hit delete, throw them into the compost, and begin anew. And when I began anew, I decided that this box of bones should come to this character via a festival of buskers, a buskers festival. And when I was Googling busker festivals, I came upon the Burlington Festival of Fools. And I actually saw a picture with a man in a pink fedora that had no face. And so my story begins, the man in the pink fedora had no face. And she receives this box of bones. Another thing happened though. As I began to write this, I realized, no, I have to go there. And so I convinced my husband and my family, no, we must drive to Burlington, I have to go there. And what happened was we took a wrong turn. And because we took a wrong turn, we ended up at this gas station. I was supposed to come along the interstate and ended up at this gas station, and they said, well, you can go to the interstate that way, but why would you do that when you can take the car ferry? And I went, the car ferry? I want to take a car ferry. What's that? I've not been on a car ferry. So we took this car ferry, and it was nothing like what I expected a car ferry to look like. It just sort of looked like, in my opinion, like I parked on it, and we said, when exactly are we going to leave? And I'm like, oh, we've left. The parking lot is kind of moving. But it was sort of like that. Anyway, I'm on this thing, and my husband is sitting there going, I'm not feeling so well in the waves. And my kids are going, what happens if we sink? And I just looked at them and I said, well, I guess we swim. If we sink, we swim. So there's actually a bit of a sort of like a murder mystery, and it does involve the car ferry, and it involves, and then everything, I came back several more times to sort of get the feel of everything. And lakes, I love lakes, and lakes are beautiful, and lakes are wonderful, but lakes can be mysterious too. And so again, the car ferry and the lake and everything, it just sort of came together, and watching the mist over the lake and seeing all these wonderful, amazing things. You live in an absolutely incredible, amazing place. I live in the suburbs of Toronto. Toronto is a big city in Canada. It's a huge city, and I live in the suburbs. And even driving here with my daughter, she'd been several times, but again, the older she gets, the more things she notices, and she's like, I think I want to live here. And I said, you know, you really, truly don't know maybe how wonderful it is, your area. It's really, really beautiful. It's lovely, and it inspires stories. And I've also read, who's written that amazing book that's set here that's really creepy with the scarecrows? Small Spaces. That's written here as well, and it's so well done. So if you like creepy things. I think we're pretty much soon out of time. I apologize again for being late. Are there any questions you have of me at this point? Yes?
I don't know if this is like a common thing to do, but usually if I see interesting things and I'm just like doing something, I'll like write it down. Like one time I was at my campground, there was just this one wave, and it was like really weird. It was going across the whole lake and just...
Okay, and when I hear a wave across the lake, I think Champ. But has anyone actually seen Champ?
No.
You have?
My grandmother has, when she went to Italy.
Oh, that's so cool.
She have in Italy?
My papa says
there could
he's
be.
seen it multiple times. He says it's just a really big snake.
Could be. Who knows? So to answer your question, that is an amazing thing to do. And I will tell you this. I think you ought to do that, because that wave that you saw, you might not have the story behind it now, but that story may come to you down the road. And so it is important to write things down. And actually, the older I get, because I'm very old, I forget everything. So I wake up in the middle of the night with the best idea ever, and I'm like, this is the best idea ever. And by the morning, I'm like, what was that idea again? I wish I'd have written it down. So I try to write things or take notes when they come to me, because otherwise, they sort of come to me and they're gone.
Have you ever tried like making like a knockoff of like a book, like?
So, no, but there is what is called in these days sort of like a reimagining. I know that there's some of these old fairy tales have been reimagined. I know there's one called A Curse as Dark as Gold, and that's a retelling of Rumpelstiltskin, and I'm reading one right now. It's a little bit maybe too old for you, I don't know. I haven't gotten to the end of it to see if there's anything in it that would be inappropriate, but it's called The House of Salt and Shadow, and that, I believe, is a retelling of a Russian fairy tale called The 12 Dancing Princesses or something. So I don't know if I'd use the word like knockoffs as much as there are reimaginings. Now, clearly I wouldn't sit here and go, oh, I know, I'm going to write about a boy who discovers he's a wizard and then goes to a place called Bogwarts, right? School. I mean, no, you're not going to do that. But again, little aspects. So it has actually been said, there are no new stories. And when people say there are no new stories, how come books are still being produced? And that's because every single one of you has a unique spin, a unique perspective, a unique setting, a unique premise that you can put. So like Romeo and Juliet has been done a million times, even that cute elf one, Nomeo and Juliet, I like that one. The Lion King, if you like The Lion King, that is Hamlet. If you ever have to write an awesome essay when you get older on the Shakespearean play Hamlet, do a comparative essay between Hamlet and The Lion King, because they're the same. They took Hamlet and said, let's make it animals, let's set it in Africa. Hamlet will be Simba, and Timon and Pumbaa are Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and Nala is Ophelia, and Rafiki is Horatio. So it is 100% the same story. It's the same story. All right, I don't know, any other questions or questions? Yes?
Do you have a favorite book that you have read?
Do I have a favorite book
That you have read?
that I've written? So that's an amazing question, and I will tell you this, that pretty much every author will answer this the same way. My favorite book is always the one I'm currently writing. Because in order for me to go from a blank page to a full manuscript, it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of belief in the story, belief in your own capabilities, which is sometimes hard to have. Even multi-published authors go through a lot of self-doubt, like, oh, I don't know, is this any good? I'm not sure. And so you have to be passionate about the story that you're currently writing. If I were writing a story now and I were to say, well, this story's okay, but like it's not half as good as the one I wrote like 5 books ago, well, then I don't think that I'd have what it would take to pursue that story. So I think pretty much every author says my favorite story is the one I'm currently writing. I currently have a book on submission, so I don't know if an editor will pick that one up, and I have another one that I'm halfway completing.
Why do people like to change up like movies and write them into books, but change the way they like what happened?
So from a book to a movie, I think when they change a book to a movie and they make changes, it's for the simple fact that it's a different media. So, you know, if you have a book with a lot of internal dialogue, right, where the character's thinking and thinking, I mean, you can't have a movie where the person's going.
I mean, you could have a voiceover.
Right? So you can do that. It's a different medium. And also they have to take sometimes a big giant book and they have to shrink it to 2 hours. I mean, sometimes that's hard and they leave important things out, but then sometimes they take an amazing book, in my opinion, like The Hobbit, which is a small book, and they create 3 movies out of it, which waters down that plot and adds things in that were never in the original, and I don't know that they made that better. I thought they did a fabulous job with Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Super happy with those. Not as happy with The Hobbit. I think the Lord of the Rings could have been extended, but The Hobbit should have been one movie. Yeah.
How do you like create a book when you like you just like you're like writing and then you just like get stuck after like
So what you have to do.
Like continue that?
So I think, again, not every idea that I get becomes a whole novel. There has to be a lot in place before I begin to write. So I think of an idea, and usually that idea, the compost in my mind, is there for a long time. And sometimes, so the novel that I currently have on submission, I finished in the summer. It took me approximately a year to write, but that story in my mind had been there for about 5 years of me thinking about it, and rethinking how it should start, and rethinking who these characters are. So there has to be a lot in place. But if you get stuck, you put it aside and you read or you write something new, and sometimes that happens. Many people have read The In-Between. The In-Between was actually written after The Doll's Eye. The Doll's Eye was written first. It was called House of Dolls, and it was half the story that it is. And I couldn't get it right, and it was only after I wrote The In-Between and returned to the book that it really started to come together. Thank you. I'm so sorry again that I was so late, and I'm sorry. I hope that that I was able to get some of the things in.
It was worth it, just how little you did, but it was amazing. So thank you so much for being here.
So thank you so much for having me. Continue to read, continue to write. Whatever your dream is, I always say this, your dreams are possible, but they're only possible with two things. It's not, your dream won't come true by you sitting there and just dreaming it. You have to work hard and persevere. So those are the two things. If you have a dream, whatever that dream is, whether it's writing or illustrating or whether it's becoming a professional hockey player, it's a lot of hard work and perseverance. So good luck with your dreams.